So the issue that I'm going to talk about would be about Iran and European geopolitics of energy. There is an agenda to be discussed here. One would be that what's the relationship between the energy security and foreign policy? How and when did energy climb the list of foreign policy agenda? The classic view is that it has been incorporated very recently. If you look carefully and insightfully into the issue, you might think of incorporation of energy security in foreign policy long before than this time, probably during 1990s. And then the second issue would be that how we understand energy security in the context of a bipolar world, different from that in a quadrupolar world. What I mean that it's after the fall of the Berlin Wall, because it's true that we had a unipolar world, but in terms of energy, it was a bipolar. And then that has been changed probably during the 20s to a quadrupolar world. And the dynamics changing because of this change. So that's important to take note of that. And then the third issue would be the relationship between free market or markets versus geopolitics as far as energy is concerned. It would be during 1990s and also 2000s. And the fourth and last issue would be that what would be the implication of these developments as far as Iran's energy diplomacy is concerned vis-a-vis Europeans. So that would be the things that we are going to discuss today. Now the first issue. The fall of Berlin Wall probably followed by two things, among others. What would be a tide of democratization in the world? And the second issue would be an attractiveness or belief in the free market norms and the functionality of free market because of the actually collapse of the Soviet Union and collapse of the central planning way of thinking about economy. So in terms of energy security, the consequence of these two phenomenon was thinking of energy security in a bipolar world consisting of the US and EU, because it was a unipolar in the sense that the United States was the hegemon of the whole world, and then everybody was going to mimic that norms and that standard. But then there are two big players in the world at that time as far as energy was concerned. One was the EU, the other was the US. So they were planning about how to use energy and how to securitize that matter and how to actually bring the security in their long-term perspective. And then thinking this way, then you might probably admit that energy security was a latent element in the foreign policy. So it was in the foreign policy agenda of the US and EU, but it was a latent factor. It was not something that you could think very visibly. Then we see that between the US and EU, there is a division of labor in energy security. If we have any doubt about this way of thinking, then the best way would be consulting the report produced by International Crisis Group in 2007. It says the EU is in practice increasingly beholden to the US hard security power in places such as the Middle East and Central Asia, being deployed to safeguard the interest of the market democracy West as a whole. So you see two critical words here in this phrase. One is hard security, which is provided by the US. The second one is the interest of market democracy West. So market and democracy is the reference point here. So it means that the US and EU, they divided their specialty and their labor based on their comparative advantages. One is taking care of the security, the other one is taking care of the free market norms, an extension of that free market norms to the neighboring countries and where producer states are located. So what's the US role, as I mentioned, in charge of, if we probably have two storylines as far as energy is concerned. One would be like regions and empire, which is representing geopolitical dimension, and the other one, which is probably market and institution. So the first one is represented by the US. So US was in charge of regions and empires, or in charge of geopolitical approach in energy security. Or it was the guarantor of last resort for international security. So this was the role of US, and the role of EU. EU was in charge of markets and institution approach, which was sometimes called liberal superpower, sometimes normative power, sometimes geopolitical imperialism. These are the Western views. It's not contrary to the Western view. I'm just talking about mainstream. I'm not talking about something at all. And sometimes, according to Financial Times, regulatory imperialism. These are all the labels of EU as far as energy security was concerned. So you see that the word of imperialism there, the word of geopolitics is there, but it is a soft power. It's a normative power. It's something that is very, suited the comparative advantage of the EU. So that's the division of labor among these two big powers. Energy security and the division of labor between the EU and US. So why? Because of fall of the Berlin Wall, as I mentioned, because of revolution in information technology and related industries like biotechnology, nanotechnology, so they brought a lot of new things in the world and give you good means and instruments to go forward. And then because of a new wave of globalization, so you are in a good situation and honeymoon. Then the principle here to be applied is economic comparative advantage of each side to take care of a special part of the issue and the self-interest. So self-interest is the driving force. Then if you want to look carefully about the energy security in the EU, then the first thing that comes into mind would be looking at the grand strategy of the US. What is the grand strategy of the US? Because US was part of the issue. I'm just talking about the background before entering into the game that I'm going to focus on. And these are very important in terms of knowing that what happens and who was responsible for. So the US grand strategy was division of labor. It's division of labor globally on the basis of principle of comparative economic advantage. So the champion of this story is Thomas Barnett. The Pentagon New Map was a book published in 2005 and was a bestseller. The idea came up at 2003, but I believe it was much earlier than that time and probably during the 1990s. So area of US economic comparative advantage is what? One is having a world currency, reserve medium, which is dollar. You print paper and it becomes money in the world. So it's a good and unique position that gives you leverage. Then you have the largest army of the world. Then you are the most efficient economic system of the world. Then you have the strongest and biggest financial center of the world, looking in a pre-crisis, pre-financial crisis era. And then high technology you have, high factor productivity you have, high innovation rates you have, and etc. So these are the comparative advantages that you have. So as such, then you have to marry security to finance. That's why the Pentagon, probably during the 9/11, it had a probably meeting at that time in which Thomas Barnett was supposed to attend in the Twin Towers. And then the second issue, you have to have a transaction, a global transaction. From one side, you get the goods manufactured elsewhere in the world. And from the other side, you produce and export security to the world. So that's why the US was supporter and was promoter of security of the world. It was acting like a gendarmerie. So we come up with this map, which shows us the division of the whole globe into two parts. A part which is in the center, we call it core. And then the other side, which is, the other part of the world, we call it gap, but non-integrated gap, non-integrating gap. So look at the defense, probably the number of responses that the US military has in the world, and then they wrote it in a map. And then the center of that would be in Middle East. Look at it, yes? And other, beyond this non-integrating gap, you're very small, incidents, which you cannot statistically think of it relevant. So what would be the agenda? Would be, shrinking this gap and taking it, or taking over of it by the core. So you have a new core and you have an old core. In old core, you have the Western Europe. In new core, you have Russia, say, for example, China, India, and a number of other things. So that's the way that they think, and then it was very related to the energy security. So why is that? Because there are four flows which are relevant here. Energy, people, capital, security. So look at people. So in people case, you have currently 6.7 billion people in the world, okay? That would be by 2050, 9 billion. And then the distribution of it. 2 billion would be in the age of 0 to 15. 2 more billion would be in the age of 65 over. And 5 billion would be between 15 and 64. So if you define a support ratio, and support ratio would be the division of 3 by A plus B, people who can work, divided by people who cannot work, then this has a very meaningful interpretation. So this support ratio in developed countries currently would be 5 over 1. So 5% can support 1% currently. In 2050, that would be 2 divided by 1. So the number of people who can support would reduce very sharply. Then look at it in less developed countries, not least developed countries, in developing countries. Currently, and in 2050, you have the same rate, 10 over 1. So what does that imply? It implies that you have to have a flow of people from developing countries to the developed countries. So that would be one flow which is very important in the strategy. And then the second one would be about the flow of energy. All the regions of the world that they have energy, they're located in non-integrating gap. So you have to have an export of energy from non-integrating gap to the core. And then look, it's quite clear, because I do not need to mention further than that. Then, what would be the implication of that? The implication of that would be that China and India, they might have a military rivalry in countries, in areas, in regions that they have energy, like, for example, the Persian Gulf. So this is a pretext for the US to move forward and put these countries aside and push these countries to reduce their defense budget. So China will be attractive market for the US goods. So what would be this is a transaction. So US is going to export security to the rising powers like China and India in such a way that they do not need to have rivalry in countries, in areas, in regions that they have energy, like Persian Gulf. And in transaction, China is a good, producer of global goods to be supported, to be exported to the US. India would be in good position for information technology and IT stuff. So that produce IT stuff, the other side produce, consuming goods, and then in exchange for that, US is going to support security to them. So that would be the logic. And then the third flow would be of capital. Capital, of course, is moving from or between the old and the new core, not from non-integrating gap to the core or vice versa. So the capital that you have, your capital goes from old core to new core because they want it to flourish. So that's why the countries that have energy, they do not have investment sufficient to bring about the infrastructure in energy as needed. So this means that new core would remain capital dependent on the old core. And then Asia's problem from US strategic view would be what? Existence of strong states like China. So thinking as strategists in the US, you do not have to have strong states. You have to have weak states throughout the world. You have to export your democracy and free market norms, and thinking nearly different than classic one. In classic thinking, you have to counterbalance powerful states. In new thinking, you think of bandwagoning and probably, exporting normative, thinking and democracy and free market to weak states. So those weak states cannot do anything. And they come to you and then they provide you whatever you want. So that's the new thinking. So the existence of a strong state from US strategic viewpoint is something bad. So China, why? Because prevention of private market, private free markets to develop, that would be one reason. And then the existence of unfair legal treatment of all market players. You give concession to your domestic producer. So that's not good. You have to be fair in respect to whoever, do the activity. And then the existence of chronic crisis-stricken spots, like in Afghanistan, like in Iraq, and like in other places, so you have to deal with them. So these are the bad things. And then US rationale is that US military presence will reduce the defense budget allocations and help the region grow more economically. So that was the region. And then globalization and the US security strategy would be, as I mentioned, shrinking the gap, firewalling the core against gap threats like terrorism, drug spreading disease, exporting US security to the crisis-stricken spots, and these are the things that I mentioned shortly. So now we come back to the EU, because we explained something related to the US, because US was taking care of the role of security provider of the energy game as far as Central Asia and the Caucasian countries were concerned. Now we come back to the issue of market versus geopolitics debates and energy security context. We have a number of things to say that markets working better, and these are probably the stuff of 1990s. One is the historical facts. We have historical facts, and that's saying about the flourishing of the markets, and then extension of the markets, and then the commodity and financial markets, and then oil becomes part of that commodity market, so markets working better. So we have to get out of geopolitics of 1970s and 1980s. That would be one rationale for that. And then the power of markets interpretation. You say that, okay, we have 2003 oil prices going up. We should not be concerned because it was a due to the fact of the catch-up process. What does that mean? It means that during 1990s, prices were low, investment were low in oil and gas, and because of that, supply was reducing. But then by the time that India and China come up, then the demand rises. Then we have a, we have a misbalance between supply and demand. So that show up in terms of prices going up. So this is the rationale. So market interpretation would be something in favor of functionality of markets versus geopolitics. And there are feasibility arguments. By feasibility arguments, we mean that, say, for example, US security paradigm, as I mentioned earlier, and then the status of the EU in terms of being able to provide and export norms to the world. Then having this, then you have to have an international coordination mechanism. By international coordination mechanism, we mean you have to have good governance, multilateral institutions, and cooperation. But then there is a conditionality in this matter. And what would be that? You have to encourage competition for the markets to work. At the same time, you have to bring about more investment, or not to discourage investment in infrastructure, and you have to have capacity and productive capacity. Otherwise, you cannot proceed in that front successfully. Then the historical backdrops, as I mentioned, what are the meaning of that historical backdrops? We have the growing role of international market vis-a-vis vis-a-vis oligopolistic linkages. Since oil crisis of 1970s, there was an oligopolistic way of proceeding. Say, for example, consumer and producer states, they sit together, and then multinational oil companies, they were part of the issue, so there are oligopolistic linkages. But then when international market developed, then you do not need to think of those way of thinking. Then the expansion of commodity and financial market you have, oil is no more susceptible to market dynamics rather than geopolitics. And then you have the development of a connected set of commodity markets, where competition is the rule and economics works. And then you have the imbalance of power to the disfavor of exporting states. Say that these countries who are producing oil and gas, they're not figures. Prices are low, they're not powerful, we should ignore them, and they're ignored. Let's proceed with, in front of market expansion. So by the time that market expansion goes on, then they shrink further and further, and they would not be in a position to support their own rights. So you should not be worried about them. So these were something behind the thinking of probably strategists in this front. Then you have the incipient development of international gas market. Why is that? Because gas market previously was mimicking the oil market. No, gas market is a staple fuel. And since it is a staple fuel, and since LNG market is also developing, then you can think of spot markets. So with this way, you can think of free market, in which gas market would be incorporated. So these are the developments which happened, in favor of functionality of markets. Then, for instance, the power of market interpretation, as I mentioned, 2000 prices, 2003 oil prices increase. You have the catch-up phenomenon, as I mentioned, and there was also oil peak mistake. Some people say that the peak of oil would be around 2000. But no, we see that the peak is not still reached. So it was probably on the basis of miscalculation and on the ignorance of the fact that when prices goes up, they bring with them, development in, say, for example, exploration, new stuff, advances, technology, and other things. So they push up, and then at the end, you have a plateau of oil production, a sustainable plateau of oil production. That's the interpretation of these market viewers. then future prices would be less stable. But at the same time, the key point is that you have to temper the natural ebb and flow of market adjustments. So these are the things that you can do with the functionality of market. Why should we be concerned with geopolitics? Implication of those things would be that you should not be worried about reducing import dependencies, and you should concentrate your effort on market extending energy policies. So these were the way that the thought was following in 1990s and probably early 2000. Then the feasibility argument, you mentioned that the guarantor of the last resort, US is, and then market-based solution involve international coordination based on these three things, in which the comparative advantage of EU is located, international good governance standards, multilateral institutions, and cooperation. I mentioned earlier about bipolar world. In bipolar world, you have a unipolar world, and that's the US, but then you have bipolar world. In that, one is acting unilaterally. So US was acting unilaterally. Look at the mechanism of the business of US with the world. US was focusing on FTAs, while Europe didn't. What does that mean? It means that you think unilaterally, and you join people and you join countries who are favorably thinking about you. So you build up a number of FTAs with the world, as far as you can. So that's your US. And then the EU. EU is a multilateral institution building. So thinking about central institution building, and then it's a model. You know, you try to join people, come to you and think likewise, and then you join your efforts and you think multilateral. So these are the division of labor between them. A unilateral way of thinking and a multilateral thinking, both of them would constitute a world of bipolar. It was the thinking of late 1990s and probably to the mid-2000s. But then the story is changing. And that's the new thing that is happening, and that's why that we have to take care of energy security.
Excuse me, what is the definition of FTA?
Free trade agreements. Then you have the political challenge. If you are going to be a promoter and advocate of free market, that would be you have to find and design planning and mechanism in which you can encourage competition without discouraging long-run investment in infrastructures and productive capacity. Here comes into the picture the role of oil and gas multinational companies, because they are the corrector of the capacity, and they have to have the job done very well. Otherwise, you would be in trouble with this way of thinking. Then market lost the game to the geopolitics of energy. Why is that? Number one, US withdrew from the European energy game. It was not indeed a withdrawal of the US. It was engagement and preoccupation of the US in wars like Afghanistan and Iraq. Because some people think that there were the wars of energy in itself, in themselves. Oh? So that's why we think that US did not withdraw. US engaged in its stuff, in a difficult job, which could not take attention to the game that was started earlier by him or her. So characteristics of the quadripolar world, so we had a bipolar world in energy, and then we have a quadripolar world in energy. Consisting of US, EU, Asia, Middle East. So exactly the core of the mistake is here, because you did not think of Middle East and big players in the Middle East like Iran in your earlier designation of the game. And that was the source of concern and problem which popped up recently. And then Asia, of course, we didn't take care of Asia. I mean, by China and India during that time, but then they started to be important. So China and India's rise of power and energy poverty. You have energy poverty in the world. If you are going, because you, as I mentioned, the energy that you have is located in non-integrating gap or developing countries. If you are going to help them in such a way that they gain, access on the energy and grow further, then you do not have sufficient oil and gas left in the world for you. And if you prevent them from access and gain into energy and growth, then there would be a number of conflict-laden matters and subjects in future in those countries. Then you have to manage them. So this is the poverty, energy poverty would be something which puts you in a challenging position. You do not know what to do. Why? Because you did not think them in a package. You think them separately, one issue separated from other things, and you try to sort it out, but leaving other issues aside. No, they come up into the picture and they try to show themselves. So that would be challenges for you. So multinational companies, they're being handicapped. Why? Because multinational companies, there are no longer resources available to them, except for the case of Iran. Because they tried to have access in the market of Iran, but the mechanism of contracts were such that no access to the whole reserves were given to them. So that's why they say that Iran is a greenfield. Is a greenfield. That's why that you have political stuff in Iran to continue, because you have something over there, and you need it, and they're not giving to you through the multinational companies. So that's one point. And then you have in future growing concentration of oil and gas producer. For example, you have Russia, Turkmenistan, Qatar, Iran. Half of the gas reserves of the world is allocated naturally to these countries. So it means that you do not have a free market norms dominating the oil gas in future, the gas market in future. Because with a small number of the players, it's like an oligopolistic game, not a free market game. So these are the challenges ahead of time. And then you have the politicization of energy and a kind of mismatch between producer and consumer expectation here. So, which I explained the last point. If we want to explain about the energy politicization, it would be a very critical element that we have all think about it. And if we want to think of it, then we have to see that how international energy actor is the EU. EU was wrong in conceptualization of the issue. For instance, the explanation of the experts in the EU is that, I'm challenging them actually, they say that oil and democracy appear not to mix. Okay? So this is the classic view of the Western experts. Or probably they say that the first law of petropolitics, the price of oil and the pace of freedom always move in opposite direction in oil-rich petrolist states. So it's the first law of petropolitics. Then they explain from the other side something which is quite contrary to this one, saying that, okay, in OPEC, countries are contending higher prices. Why? They say that because of the political liberalization in those countries. How is that possible? From one side, you have the political liberalization in OPEC countries, and because of that, they ask for higher prices. And from the other side, you say that the first law of petropolitics is that the price of oil and the pace of freedom moves in the opposite direction. And then what would be the implication of this first law of petropolitics? Is that, okay, please bring the price of oil down in such a way that you can free these countries from dictatorship. So these are the thinking. These are the thinking that do not bring you in energy security in the long run. You can do your business. You can topple down a number of regimes, weak ones, but then at the end of the day, you do not have the long-run stability, the long-run security. Long-run security has a triangle. That's food, water, energy. In a long-run perspective, we mean the time that we do not have any distortion. All the distortions come up in the short run. So in the long run, there's a steady state. So in that steady state, you have to have food, you have to have water, you have to have energy. So this way of thinking is not going to help. And then, with energy prices rising, one of the other proposition is like this. With energy prices rising and supplies dwindling, the tide of democratization seems to have met match and the black tide of petro-authoritarianism. So you see? So you are showing something very bad to the people, to the elites, to the people who are thinkers, the youngsters of these countries, and saying that please try to topple down these regimes. Because that would be a petro-authoritarianism. That would not be democracy in future. Because we need your energy, and you should not be concerned about that. Just bring down this dictator, and all things will appear to be in good shape. So this is the way that, you know, the way that the arguments go on. And then the autocratic regimes in producer states increasingly subsidize domestic fuel prices to shore up their own legitimacy. Okay, these are another way of, you know, conventional way of thinking. Well, if you think carefully in countries, as far as I know, in countries like Iran, there is no relationship between the legitimacy of the government and the decline of, say, for example, energy prices, fuel prices. Why? You know, Iran is a large country. It's a civilization. Once we say civilization, we think of history. It's not history, it's a current status. You know, if you have a big civilization, then you have the elements of emotion, the elements of value, and the elements of wisdom, all incorporated in the same place, and your people thinking that way. So they think civilizationally. They think in civil way. So they have objections. They come to the street, they say that this is not true, this is true, these are the functions of civilization. But not many countries, they learned how to run their bureaucracy, how to insulate their bureaucracy from outside pressures, how to embed norms sufficiently good into their bureaucracy. And that's the method, the source of concern. You have a big civilization, you have a strong civilization, but you do not have a bureaucracy which is suitable for your agenda to bring it, you know. Yeah. So these are the way, you know. But then experts here are thinking that okay, there is a legitimacy problem. There is the rentier state and all those conventional things. I do not challenge them. They're explaining something. Their causality. So they explain this A causes B, this causes C. But then at the same time, there are other causalities working. So you have to have a big and full picture of the whole story in such a way that those causality do not you know, conduct you to the wrong way. And then the second thing is that EU was insincere in supporting democracy. For instance, a clock, it was arguably mentioned, a clock for pursuing oil interests. Milosevic overthrow in 1990s. People say that it was because of the pipeline, you know, reaching from Russia to the West, to Europe. So that was the reason. It's a way of thinking, you know, you can challenge it, but it's something. And then at the same time, you have a pattern which is compatible with other things. You do not have something and odd with other, you know, evidences. So for instance, you say that peace deal in Sudan. Some people say that's because of, bringing oil from the south, releasing oil, because part of energy security is there. People say removal of Taliban. Removal of Taliban say that, okay, we need a pipeline going from Central Asia to that part, and then it's security. People say pro-democracy policies in the Middle East. So they say that that's because of oil. That's because of gas. So these are in a long way of thinking. It's a kind of energy security. How long does it have time?
Perhaps just another 10 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll try to race to the end. So here, and then the third factor is EU's soft policies against producer states. For instance, that we have new oil wars. Say that old oil wars was that. It was a competition and it was a fight against superpowers of the time over energy resources of one country or region. So the new oil wars, what would be that? It would be countries in dominant position like EU going to producer states and negotiating or talking or fighting with them over the resources that they have. So this way of thinking is not going to surely produce energy security. This is the new oil wars. Okay? And a state building agenda. They're just promoting a state building. State building in the same way that they think. Why? Because of energy. And then you have the counterbalancing, which was the old way of thinking, and then the bandwagoning, which is the new way of thinking. So, now I come down the road to the energy game that was supposed to explain about it and to focus on it. There were theoretical challenges and theoretical perspective that I mentioned about the whole story. Then you think of European energy game in Central Asia of 1990s. What is the characteristics? US provider of security and pipeline designers. Okay? We have BTC. Later on we had BTE. Yes, Baku, Ceyhan, and then Erzurum, the first one, Baku, Ceyhan, Tiflis. And then the TCP, Trans-Caspian Pipeline. So they were designed in such a way that provide, these were the issues and stories of 1990s. So they were supposed to produce, to transit the oil and gas located in Central Asia and the Caucasus after the fall of the Soviet Union. So this was the work of and the functionality of the US. And then EU was a free market actor, a norm promoter in a globalized world, saying that, okay, I'm going to extend my internal market in energy to your market. So in such a way that we think likewise, you produce me with oil and gas and I give you the money or the commodities or the things or the support that you need. Russia, at that time, was a fair player, a fair producer and a fair transit country because it had a number of networks coming from Russia and the former Soviet Union to the West. So it was in good position. Okay, we honor your right. You are there, you should be there, there's no problem about it. What about Turkey? Turkey is a natural energy hub. Why? Because located in the part of the world which have access to the Persian Gulf, to the Central Asia, to Russia, okay? So it's a natural hub. So we have to honor that right. So that's Turkey. Central Asia, they are the producers, so they are okay. The only player that should be out of game is Iran. Okay? While Iran is a good producer and is a good transit country, is located in the crossroad of countries have access to the oil and gas, then we do not consider you, we ignore your natural right and put you aside. So that was the game in 1990s, okay? Then what happened? In 2000, there was a reversal. In 2000, US withdrawal we had due to its engagement in Iraq and Afghanistan war. China and India's rise we have. They think geopolitic way in energy and energy security rather than in common free market. And we have an energy politicization, as I mentioned earlier, among producer and among consumer states. And the very important factor, we have the Russia's assertiveness. Look, if you see, I'm Russian. I see that there is a delicious stuff here. It's Iran. It's put aside, okay? And then there is a country, Turkey here, in a, shaky position. So the best way would be I use my power to, to bring security to my own, and then to have benefit of it, to take advantage of that. So you have the Russia's assertiveness. And then by the time that other players in the EU was thinking, like Germany and others, they realized that the previous game is not working. Without, in a latent way, and without mentioning in a demonstrative way, they tried to change their position. So we have the Nord Stream. The Nord Stream pipeline coming from Russia directly through the sea to Germany. So that is not on the basis of the EU instruction. Okay? And then a number of other things. So you have the game, the reversal of the game, started with Russia's assertiveness and followed on by other countries important in the EU, like Germany. While others are in disagreement with them, small countries that they joined recently to the EU, they were in opposition. Okay? Then Turkey started to change the game. Look at the equilibrium. You have the equilibrium of the game. If that equilibrium is going to be sustainable, then you have to honor the natural right of each player. Once you do not honor the natural right of each player, then you bring the incentive for deviation from the equilibrium path. That deviation started by Russia, followed by Germany and other places, and very recently by Turkey. So Turkey tried to diversify in energy routes, and very importantly, diversify in foreign policy. Turkey recently, it could be considered united with the EU, as it's a member, as it nominate for the EU, membership. It could be considered united with the US. It could be considered united with Israel, and it could be united with Iran. You didn't have such a thing before. So it's diversification of foreign policy thinking, and put you in much more difficult position compared to before. Okay? Then, what would be the implication of these things? Earlier in 1990s, you had a coordination game. In coordination game, you have two equilibrium. Yes? One is the one which is not coordinated, the other one is the one that's coordinated, and produce a better state, better position. Then, this game has been changed to prisoner's dilemma. In prisoner's dilemma, you have a low equilibrium and you have a high equilibrium. Once you cannot coordinate sufficiently, you cannot show up cooperatively, then you are forced to take place in low equilibrium. And in low equilibrium, you are in a suboptimal position. You are not in optimal position. So this is the game which is in Europe. And I could show you that in an illustrative way, and with figures and numbers and assigning things in such a way that you have a clear picture, but it probably takes time. So long-run energy security is in limbo and suboptimal position in the EU. Consider these things that I've mentioned. Then, what would be the role of Iran? Iran constantly, under the coordination game of 1990s, or the incipient prisoner's dilemma. Incipient prisoner's dilemma. The prisoner's dilemma is not taking place, but is incipient. Under the incipient prisoner's dilemma game, Iran is a residual player. While you are a residual player, then you have to decide after other players, decided. They maximize their benefit. Whatever left for you, you can take advantage of that. This is the meaning of residual player. Okay? So in this context, what Iran should do? If I would be Iran, I consider this way. I prioritize the gas reserves first for oil-enhanced recovery. You know that the functioning of the oil wells, after some time, the pressure comes down inside the reservoir, and then you have to enhance it, that pressure, either with injection of gas or injection of water. And the structure of the mountains, oil mountains of Iran, inside the earth would be such that it's more beneficial for you if you inject gas. If you inject gas, that gas would be reserved there. You can have advantage of that in future, and when the prices come up with rising, trend. So you should not be hesitated for being ignored from the routes, the pipeline routes. Why? Why? Because you have to inject that gas into the field, enhance the recovery of oil, sell the oil in high prices of the day, and reserve that gas for future use. Okay? So that would be one priority. The second one, build up a regional processing center, because you are located in the crossroad. So the best way for you is focusing on processing. Why? Because you have good technical ability and good engineers. So those engineers and those, legacy of the past probably gives you a good position in terms of building up a processing center. And then the third one, focus on LNG production. This is something that Cyprus can take advantage of that. You are a small country. You are located close, enclaved by the sea. Then you are in good position to build LNG terminals. And you are in good position because you are part of the EU. So probably you have to have good lobbying power in the EU, in the West, in the US, so you can close up the conflict between Iran and the EU and the US, and then take advantage of that. Either make business with that if you do not need it, or if you do need it, then use it. LNG, Iran needs LNG facility. Why? Because LNG, that basically is a technology of the US, not Russia, not China, not elsewhere. So it needs to facilitate the buildup of LNG facilities. Cyprus would be in good position. So that would be the message of my coming here, probably. I'm just thinking that unofficially and from the research perspective, but I'm sure that research perspective is not something against the official position. So if we think of it carefully and bring it, to the attention of people who are working in an executive body of the country, so most countries, I think, would benefit from that. And then the fourth priority would be follow the crossroad route, something that I call it myself. I call it crossroad route. What does that imply? It means that you have to eliminate the rivalry in your country. You have to allocate your releasable gas, not the gas that you have, because I think that the priority, you should take care of those priorities. And if anything left, which is left, substantively, because the country is very big in terms of reserves, then you have to allocate them equally to your west and to your east to reduce the assertiveness against you, against your long-term benefit. Europe is a player who needs gas, natural gas, or LNG in future. Okay, say that I'm going to provide you, to earmark for you, half of my releasable gas. Are you going to be a partner of me directly, or you are going to stay out and be in a non-reconcilable situation? If you are not going to be taking care of me, and if you are not going to be a partner of me, okay, I divide the allocation for you into half. Give half of it to Russia to take care of you, and the other half to Turkey to take care of you. But there is a possibility for them, an incentive for them to use it rather than export it to you. And it's your own discretion what to do. Okay, but I allocate half of my releasable natural gas to you because you're the nature, and I'm not going to ignore you. You're the consumer. You're naturally the consumer, and I have to honor the right of you. And then to the east of country, I allocate half of it to the east of country. And the east of my country, there are two big players. One is India, the other one is China. Okay, I separate India from Pakistan and put Pakistan and China in the same axis. provide them with 1/4 of releasable natural gas through the pipeline, through LNG, whatever they want. And then the other half, which would be 1/4 of natural gas releasable, I put it for the India and Asian axis. That would be in LNG form. Why? Because they do not have common territory and borders with me. So the best way is just focusing on LNG. So this would be, in short, the presentation that I prepared for you. It was last night that I prepared it, so sorry for any inconvenience in the case. Thank you.
Thank you very much.